So, welcome to the next episode of the Circular Table Talks brought to you by We Don't Have Time and Ragn-Sells, the European Environment Company, which I see among its many ambitious actions is as a member of the 1.5 centigrade supply chain leaders group hosted by our partner, the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and supported by the We Mean Business Coalition. So that's pretty good. Today, we're going to look for a second time this year in our series of circular table talks on circularity in the construction sector, because, of course, we know the way the world builds its cities and infrastructure while dealing with resource flows of end-of-life structures is going to be crucial for meeting the Paris Climate Agreement and its targets and the wider Sustainable Development Goals. This second episode is inspired by a new report commissioned and compiled by Ragn-Sells and bringing together leading experts on this topic. And that's called Paving the Way, How Circular Construction Builds a Sustainable Society. And we think it's going to be released sometime this week. I've had a little sneak preview, and I can say that the report assesses the current situation with a focus on Europe, and it's highlighting, for example, the findings of the United Nations Environment Programme's hosted Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction that estimates construction accounts for over 34% of the world's energy demand and close to 40% of all energy and process-related carbon dioxide emissions. This new report, which has involved several roundtables with experts, several of those are on this program, also points to the wider impacts of this sector and notes that 50% of the sector's emissions linked with the extraction and the use of raw materials also leads to significant water stress and biodiversity loss worldwide. I could go on about this report, but that's something that we've got experts here to do. But I think it's clear that there is a lot happening in the European Union right now. There's a lot of directives, there's the Green Deal, and these to an extent do address the construction and circularity story. But there's clearly a lot more that needs to be done. Just before we get underway for this terrifically important broadcast, let me ask the viewers to download the We Don't Have Time app at www.wedon'thavetime.org so you can pose questions to our guests and interact with them too. So let me first introduce Serge Salat. He's architect, planner, and founder and president of the Urban Morphology and Complex Systems Institute that is based in Paris, France. He's also a professor at the École Spéciale d'Architecture. There's a British person completely mangling the wonderful French language. And he's also a senior advisor to the United Nations Environment Programme hosted International Resource Panel and its 2018 report, The Weight of Cities. Serge, the UNEP International Resource Panel's Weight of Cities report says, without a new approach to urbanization, material consumption by the world's cities will grow from around 40 billion tons in 2020 to around 90 billion tons by 2050. And it also says, therefore, the resource use implications and environmental impacts of urbanization are significant. Resources should now become a central policy concern, in addition to concerns about climate change. Serge, can you give us your rich perspective on how we create circularity in cities? And then perhaps touch a little bit on the role of construction in this vast topic that we know ranges from planning and innovation up to energy use and resource flows. Serge, you have the floor.
Okay, first, congratulations for your brilliant summary of the very thick report we did. Yes, it's true that our planet has provided us with an abundance of natural resources, but we are exhausting them at an alarming speed. And this has been happening since the massive move to cities during and after the Industrial Revolution in the mid-19th century. So urbanization is key in this exhaustion of resources. Urbanization has been based historically, the 19th century urbanization is based historically on using massively fossil fuels and resources and building empires such as the British Empire to take resources from from colonies. And now this model is moving to the global south. But the model was based on predating the resources from other countries. Uh, Extending it globally is leading to exactly what you described. It's totally unsustainable to um, expand geographically this model of urban growth. So one, and just to give you another figure, construction consumes around 60% of the world's materials and is responsible for around 53% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. A big part of it is attributable to buildings. So it's a story of buildings within cities, within a massive social and economic transformation. It's not just a story of buildings. So that's why the big perspective is, as we stressed in the report of the International Resource Panel, is about rethinking urbanization, and we need a strategy for 21st century urbanization, a strategy that allows us to understand its implications, the resources being used, and the all different tools and bundled policies can and interventions can help cities to better manage their resources, not reproduce the unsustainable model of the Western countries for more than 1 century. Isolated actions will not result in more resource efficient cities. This is also an important message. We're going to just take the shape of the city as cities, expand it unsustainably, and create big roads, use cars, and just change the cars for electric cars and retrofit the buildings. It's not just acting on the components, it's acting on the systems. For acting on the system, we suggested in the report four parallel strategies: urban spatial restructuring, human scale sustainable design, resource efficient urban components, urban infrastructure planning for cross-sector optimization and efficiency, and the promotion of sustainable behaviors. Because ultimately, cities and buildings are about people. It's not cities and buildings that consume resources. It's ultimately people that consume resources. So people behavior is also key. The first step for embedding resource efficiency in the building sector, in urbanization in general, is spatial planning. We must start with the biggest scale. A classic comparison is between Atlanta and Barcelona. The two cities have similar populations, similar wealth levels, but very different energy, carbon, resources, and economic productivities. So why? Because the difference on density and spatial extension. Atlanta's spread out urban form leads to waste, inefficiency, and high costs and high resource consumption. The sprawling scale of Atlanta makes it 17 to 26, sorry, 27 times bigger than Barcelona. As a result, you have 10 times more carbon emissions per capita in Atlanta. Road length per capita and consequently resources embedded in infrastructure are 40 times higher in Atlanta than in Barcelona. And network cost per capita is 14 times higher in Atlanta than in Barcelona. This leads to the second main lever, which is high quality urban fabric and high quality design at a neighborhood scale. And this is a big action of the United Nations. And we produce guidelines, huge 800 pages guideline, which is online at the moment, and the MOOC on neighborhood design, green and thriving neighborhoods. This is key for livability, of course, for social inclusion, but as well for resources. Studies by London School of Economics have compared 100 urban fabrics across 4 European cities, and the striking discovery is that in the same city, some urban fabrics use 6 times more than other urban fabrics just due to shape factors. And I did with my institute the same studies in China, and we found the same results, meaning that the sizing, orientation, uh, of the buildings, and not only the buildings, of the voids between the building, the public space, the urban space, the street canyons, the plazas, are really key for letting the air breathe, enter into the buildings, create natural ventilation, have solar gains in cold countries, have shade in hot countries, and all this is super dependent on the climate actually. And this bioclimatic urban fabric is key for saving massive amounts of operational energy, which in turn are translated in savings in resources for providing this operational energy. But not only that, a big part of the uh, issue is embedded carbon and embedded energy in buildings and infrastructure. And the fact that you have huge roads, weakly connected places, uh, implies big roads, wide roads. We can see that in China, instead of narrower roads, which are easier to navigate and which also embed much less resources in infrastructure. It's better to have a sufficient length of streets, but narrower than to have a few streets which are. So we establish benchmarks around 100 intersections per square kilometer.
So, Serge,
And
I'm going to have to push you a little bit on time here.
yeah,
Yeah.
I will. So I'm not going
Okay.
to describe my favorite areas in Hammarby, Sjöstad, in Malmo, in Sweden, and in King's Cross in London, which are but just a very short message. It's these good projects start by landscaping project. We don't start by a classical master planning of roads and blocks. We start by creating a landscape, and this King's Cross is about. We may come back to that later, is originally designed by and master planned by landscape architects, and not just the created streetscapes, public space, and then the buildings come around that, and not the rivers. Landscaping strategy. The first step is resource efficiency of all urban components, and that we probably will have a lot of time to talk about that. Not just buildings, but also electric vehicles, charging point networks, efficient energy, waste and water systems, street lighting technology, and smart grids, cycle paths. But this is also linked to the building's shape, to the building fabric, to the fine grain of the building fabric, and to this cross resource efficiency. And the report showed that just cross systems efficiency, including in buildings, can achieve 24 to 47% reduction in impacts on water, energy, land, and metals by 2050 in comparison with the baseline. So all this is cascading series of reductions in material use. Finally, the fourth step is the promotion of sustainable behaviors, which is important to avoid rebound effects, but also to have people interact with these buildings in a more sustainable way. And to conclude on buildings, resource efficiency and circularity in buildings should happen both at the second and third step. At the second step, we must shape and design the urban fabric, and so our buildings in the urban fabric with fine-grained bioclimatic approach and well-designed public realm. This will determine the potential for using passive techniques, natural lighting, natural ventilation, solar gains, and avoiding resource use for operating the buildings. And at the third step, which was the cross-systems integration step, we must integrate systems and components with circularity. This will be the main topic of the discussions today. This will determine the potential of buildings for implementing circular approaches in construction and management of material flows. Circular strategies should be integrated upfront in the design stage because it's where you make the most important amount of economies while with reduced costs. Strategies can focus on circular manufacturing, new business models like products as a service, digital innovation, or lifetime extension by making buildings easy to repair, refurbish, or dismantle, for example, through modularity. And also, to conclude on that, an important aspect of it is that all the traditional building industry was making easy for buildings to change functions, to transform from banks into apartments or into hotels, and from hotels into office buildings. And with the form follow functions of the modernist 20th century approach, we don't have this flexibility of changing the uses of building. And in a living city, buildings should be able to change uses very frequently, depending on market changes.
Okay, Serge, thanks a lot. That's such a massive topic, but I mean, at the heart of it, although we may dig now deeper into construction, end of life buildings, and other things, that in the end, if we don't address the holistic concept of a circularity in cities in all its aspects, we can't just cherry pick one part. You have to think about the whole functioning of the city, and then hopefully renovation rather than demolition. But when demolition occurs, those resources have to come back as well. But the buildings have to be designed in a way to make that easy, and many other things too. So, Serge, thank you. Stay with us, okay, when we come to the discussion in the second half. I want to ask now Peter Pera, is that correct? Who is, I see, British person mangling the wonderful Estonian language now. But Pertl, you're a member of parliament in Estonia and a green transition advisor at Tallinn University of Technology. You're also an urban strategist and a main editor of the Estonian construction sector roadmap 2040. Could you give us your perspective on circularity as you see it and how it relates to the construction sector? And where do you think this is all going right now?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. Don't worry about the mangling, Nick. You're doing well. I was very happy to listen to what Serge was just talking about, because so much of that we have already included in our national climate neutral construction sector roadmap too. So very much of this, I mean, architects, landscape architects, urban planners, people know about this for years and have been reading and writing reports like that urban density is really, really important when it comes to climate neutrality, because we get to be more resource efficient. Whatever we talk about, materials, buildings, roads, whatever. And the urban density examples that you mentioned, Serge, Malmö in Sweden, that I suspect would have been Västra Hamnen, a new district erected there in the early 2000s. And we, in any case, if that would have been the example, we use that as the example, the Boo 01 district, where the population density is about 12,200 people per square kilometer. And I think that was also the UN environmental program recommended optimal population rate, or somewhere around that too. So I was very happy to listen to Serge, your introduction. I'm looking very much forward to reading that report and those examples. Because in that construction roadmap that we did here in Estonia for the Green Tiger NGO, a foundation I was working for with this project before I became a member of parliament, then we talked very much about urban planning as one of the primary vehicles towards climate neutrality in the built environment. Then we need to, of course, measure the carbon footprint of buildings with the life cycle assessment methods. We need to put caps on those. So we're on track with that. In the European Union, we'll get to that place at latest 2030, although we see many countries like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, France, who have already established a requirement for all new buildings. You need to calculate the CO2 footprint, and they have established a cap too, so you cannot exceed that. Urban planning, buildings, and roads, of course, too. That same measurement logic applies. And then circularity. We need to use more and more secondary materials. We need to circulate them more. So obviously that has a prominent, we've written about that very much in our report too. And yes, I can only underline what Serge already said, that we get to, if we leave more materials in the ground, don't excavate them, don't unearth them, the better. We have a very interesting example. Well, Norway has a very interesting example that we included in our report too. It's called Future Built. So it's a long 10-year program, 100 climate neutral buildings, and among them is an interesting example. There was, and this is my final example, they renovated an office building from the 1950s in the heart of Oslo. They reused 80% of the materials. So in that building, and they got more secondary materials from other buildings in the area, 80% of the materials put in that renovation were reused, secondary materials. And they got to reduce the carbon footprint 70%. So it was a massive carbon reduction that they were able to pull off by using materials in a very smart, efficient way. So anyway, secondary materials and circular economies is very much the shape of things to come.
Yeah. Okay, stay with us on this because we're going to have a more of a discussion debate in the second half. But good to know about the Estonian construction sector roadmap for 2040 and some of the great work that's happening there. Let me now go to Christina Nora, a partner specializing in resource innovation at Norway's Omtra AS. Christina, I see that you have been spending a lot of your career working in the area of timber and wood for construction of buildings. How does a material like this fit into a circular construction future? What's its potential, and is it applicable everywhere in the world? Give us a little bit of a heads up about your perspective on construction and circularity.
I will try. Thank you so much, and thank you for very nice introductions from Estonia and also France. Well, to begin, carbon or wood is carbon. So building in timber is actually building carbon sinks. And this is the main importance regarding construction with timber. If you build in wood, you can build, so to say, anything above ground. You can build in timber. And that means that you can build in a lot of carbon and then hold on to this CO2. Actually, we do gather the timber experts of all around the world in Oslo now in 2023, and we are going to discuss how to evolve in this market. Of course, it's a very big growing market, and our forests are a bit limited. So in order to make it happen, to build more in wood, we need to use the waste wood as well. In Norway, we waste just about the same amount as what we built. So it's natural to take more care of this resource. And actually, in volume, wood is the second largest, or it's half of the waste, the construction waste in Norway. It's not the heaviest one, so it's not really regarded this way. It's a big challenge for Ragn-Sells, which do the logistics of the wood waste. So that's why I'm lucky to head the research project, which is called Circ3 or Circwood. And we try to, and actually we are also together with Future Built, which you mentioned, Per. We will try to take half of today's wood waste and make sure that we make new products and put it back into buildings. And if, or let's say when we succeed with this, we can do 8% of our commitment to the Paris Agreement. So it's really vital. So that's the Norwegian figures, but it's valid for the Nordic region. And also it's valid for the rest of the continent, but of course they don't use as much wood, so don't have that large wood waste fractions yet. So then the numbers are more 4 to 5% of their share of the Paris Agreement. today, the timber waste is called bioenergy. This is a big discussion, and energy is also influencing everything here. But of course, it's a higher take if you are able to make construction materials. So we have to make this happen. And the way to get there is a lot about culture, because we have linearity going on, and bioenergy is also still with a positive sign in front. But I do believe that, or we all in this this TV show believe that reuse is the future. So I think that when we look back, we will see 100 years of linearity and think, what did they do at that time? What we see in Circularity that we really lack is the processing stage, because reuse is not directly applicable. You know, we create the market space, and we are able to reuse and rebuild, as mentioned in Oslo with this COA 13. They reused a lot of materials, but we also need the processing in order to make it happen. So we actually, in order to make circular construction happen, we need to rebuild an urban industry, urban fabrics, as Serge mentioned. And this is the future. So we get going on timber, and we think that a lot will follow.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think it's always interesting to remember that there are other interests out there that want to use this wood for their, activities, and that's one of the tensions that's so much happening in our world is: do we use this for this, or do we use it for something else, or how much versus how much in the other sector, before we lock something in and a pathway that we can't get out of. But let me go to stay with us, Christina. Let me now bring in Anders Bang Kirtzner, Director Lendager in Denmark. Anders, I had a quick glance at your website of your company, and it shows that your architecture firm is involved in some pretty astonishing buildings that at their heart reuse and recycle and upcycle materials. So have you guys cracked the circularity challenge, albeit in Northern Europe? Just tell us how hard it is to find recycled and upcycled materials to build these special structures. And I suppose the other question that the audience might have is, well, it's all right for special structures, but what about my house? All these kind of rather emblematic, brilliant buildings. Could it become the norm in any society? Sorry, a lot of questions there. Anders, over to you.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you for having me as well. And thank you for the wonderful introduction by everyone on this call. I think just to preface my answers here, I mean, we are Linea is a hybrid architecture and innovation studio based here in Copenhagen. We have an office in Iceland as well, and we're opening up in Sweden and Germany as well. And I think I sympathize very much with what has already been said. We have actually put it upon ourselves to bastardize the form follows function, and we work within like a mental framework that we call form follows availability, where we not only focus on reuse and recycling and upcycling and these matters, but also on a more fundamental level, try to train our eye, both as strategists and as architects, to look at what is already there in the world around us. There's so much material in this world, and although I do agree what Christina said about reuse, I think it's a part of the solution, but we also represent an approach to reuse where it's not just a technical feat, it also for reuse to be sustainable, it also has to feed into a much more advanced understanding of value in the broadest sense of the term. I think we talk a lot about efficiency, about scale, and that is all words and narratives that are very closely related to the linear economy. I think what is also reflected in this form follows availability is an understanding of sufficiency, that we try to focus on not just what we want, but what we need. And I think that that is a part of the underlying behavioral driver of a greener future, is that we are pushing forward, not just in a capacity and focus on maximization, but also on sufficiency, especially in our part of the world. So to answer your first question, how hard is it? We've been at this and are still at this after 12 years, and have had a very keen focus on this approach from the very beginning. So we don't have very much else to show than these types of very ambitious projects. But I do want to say that we're also trying to be more circular in a world that is largely still linear. So there's still something to do. There's still a reason for us to get up in the morning. Let's put it that way. We also come from a point of view, although we're very anchored in the technical aspects of architecture and engineering and construction. We still believe that a main part of the challenge is cultural. It's not technical. So we approach all our projects the same way. We look at the behavior and the practice. We look at business models, as it was mentioned earlier here as well. And we try to use our architecture not just as a driver for urbanism or for financial gain, but also as an open question about the legislative frameworks that we have developed, as Serge mentioned, alongside the Industrial Revolution, because we also have to understand that the issues and the problems that we have right now, that we forces us to focus on the resources, it's not necessarily the resources' fault. It's the way we are using the resources, the way we talk about resources, their value, their accessibility. And I think right now, especially within the last couple of years, where we have seen kind of almost a complete polar switch from having very expensive labor and very cheap materials, we are now entering a point in time where resources are scarce, they are difficult to get a hold of, they are very, very expensive, and maybe where labor will be more abundant. So I think that there's also a shift going on that might not be just about how we refocus, but we actually fundamentally restructure our understanding of what do we have available to us, and how do we go about actually implementing them in a way so we also bake in the requirements and the need for flexibility that Serge mentioned in the beginning, that we try to break the mold of the past 50 years and then look forward and say, okay, we need certain fabrics and certain amounts of flexibility in our dense urban areas that hasn't been baked in for very many years, which is a huge challenge now, obviously. I think the last thing I want to say is that you referred to our website as kind of the go-to source, and what you'll see is that over the past 12 years there has been a lot of focus on our part on the resources themselves. I guess we started from a traditional point of view of architecture, where we wanted to create the architecture of the future, and in order to do so, you also needed a construction approach and a resource approach that matched that, but we couldn't find it. So in the very early days, we actually set up our own construction companies and resource innovation companies in order to be able to provide the types of materials with the carbon upside that we were looking for, because they were not readily available. So although our track record and our brand today makes it easier for us to source, structure, and also systemically acquire these materials and open up these resource opportunities for alternative resources, it is still a challenge because of the fact that the industrial scale hasn't really kicked in this part of the industry. But as we also see that things are changing, and we get to be on panels like this, and we hear that the industry are actually starting to ask questions. There are large scale movements taking effect. There is also I think a need for a certain reflection on the scale of what we're doing, because we can't consume our way out of this crisis that we're in right now. So although a resource focus is key, we also have to be very, very flexible in our understanding of resources, buildings, and the city level, and we have to work within these frameworks. As an example, just to put an end on it here, we are currently working on a large project in the center of Berlin where we're reusing the existing structure of the building that is already on the plot, and the additional materials that need to go into the building, they are sourced from a renovation project that is taking part right next door, or that are taking place right next door. And where that has some incredibly interesting perspectives in terms of architecture and aesthetics and the whole decision-making process, it's actually the structure of the planning of how you get these materials to float between these building projects that are actually creating the largest opportunity for CO2 savings, because we cut out the transportation, the reprocessing, and so on and so forth, and we do everything on the actual ground of the building where the building is actually being transformed. So again, just to summarize, 3 key focus areas on our part is behavior, practice, business models, and legislation.
Good, Anders. Thank you very much indeed. And I like the point you made that, we always thought of materials and resources in the last 50 years as being dirt cheap, and therefore anything a bit more imaginative was not possible. But the economies are changing in the world, and resources are becoming scarcer, although most people don't realize it yet. But anybody that looks at the International Resource Panel hosted by UNEP would learn pretty quickly that resources are becoming scarcer and scarcer. So I think that's a very important point. Per Larssons, he's head of sustainability at Ragn-Sells and co-chair of the International Chamber of Commerce's Circular Economy Working Group. Per is also a co-moderator on the Circular Table Talk series. And I'll ask him to sum up a bit at the end. But Per, briefly, why did Ragn-Sells commission a new report, this Paving the Way, How Circular Construction Builds a Sustainable Society? Why were you inspired to do this?
Our belief is that the circular economy will need different stakeholders to make it happen. And we need to collaborate across the value chain. And we need to understand what are our potential to contribute. Because the problem is that today's legislation almost prevents recycling companies to be part of remodeling because the current legislation. So we need to really understand what is going on. And we decided to have roundtables in all our 4 geographies, 6 roundtables in total. And quickly, the conclusion from the roundtables was, first, there has never been so much legislation changes going on ever in the history of the European Union. So there are a lot of regulations that are changing, transforming, making huge challenges for the construction sector, for the construction materials sector, and all stakeholders. The other important part was, and this is really a big finding and a very problematic finding, is that when we had those roundtables, very seldom the different stakeholders had met before. So we have very little discussion or very little collaboration across the value chain. We work in our silos, and this is something that we need to break up. So we believe that we might be the ones, or one of the ones, that can really contribute to bring stakeholders together. And as a conclusion, we have already decided now that the first deep dive of this report will be deep diving into the legislation part to understand exactly what do we need to make it happen, because it's an infarct of different kinds of legislations that will make it as we look at the moment, total chaos. Nobody knows exactly what will happen. And we will already now this week, and this is also very good, we will also this week present this report, because what has happened is that DG Research and Innovation are now launching their first Circular Cities and Regions initiative discussion. And I will be representing the business side from the ICC. And I will, of course, take the conclusions from the report in that dialogue. And of course, here I would like to hear from the rest of the team here what you want me to bring from your entities to the European Union, to the heart of the research and innovation activities.
Okay, super, Per. Thank you very much. So thanks very much, everybody. Absolutely super. All these different perspectives, from the very big holistic picture of Serge to Christina with looking at, wood-based products and bringing waste wood back into the system, to what's happening in Estonia with Pertel Peter and this new construction report, and how it's also part of the European Union's big picture on what we do with construction, to Anders, of course, with his really interesting thoughts, particularly that idea that you renovate a building here by taking the waste materials from a building next door, which sounds so cool and so wonderful. I can't imagine a better way of doing it. To obviously what Per is talking about in terms of innovation in the European Union, and how this whole story can come into that. Let me just get things going really for this debate, and feel free to jump in. Anybody, you can jump in at any time and make your point. But I was again looking at this Ragn-Sells report, which will be coming out this week, and I was quite interested in the issue of finance, right? Because I think finance is very important behind this whole story. I see that according to a McKinsey report, to hit net zero in Europe, it's going to cost 28 trillion euros, right? And a substantial amount of that needs to go into the buildings and construction sector. Where should this money go? I mean, if it's going to go into buildings and construction and whatever, a big chunk of this 28 trillion, where should it go? I mean, could we renovate the entire European Union's building stock to be more energy efficient and have solar panels fitted on the roofs and whatever? Or where would you put your money if you were spending the 28 trillion? Pertel Peter, tell me.
I think that we need to jumpstart industries here. Or if we're talking about paradigm shifts, be it renovation or processing materials or building materials, I mean, wherever we look at in a supply chain or value chain, we need to shift things dramatically everywhere all at once, and we don't have time. So if we need to create a new market, a new demand for new type of products and services, then just like with clean energy, as an analogy, first we invest, the public sector invests in one shape or form or another to that technology produced for production, to commission it, and thereby creating a little artificially perhaps that new market, and then we get more players to the field, and then it takes off. So I think a part of that answer would be to jumpstart different different industries would be where the money could go.
Mm-hmm. Do we need some of this money to invest in new skills training so that we create circular city experts, a new generation coming through, people that know how to design cities in a circular way, plus how to manage okay, good. So 2 fingers going up. Christina, fire away.
Thank you. Well, of course, we need the culture, or the new future generation. We see that they actually understand already. They know that they will think circular, and they have a different attitude towards thinking in a different or in a circular way. But in order to get industries going, we think that we need standardization, because we need to communicate standards, or we need to communicate circular construction. And I know SEN has, and also ISO has big thinkings going on standardizing on a high level, but we also need to do the low level circular or standardization. So that's what I would have asked the financing to put money on to get it going, actually.
Okay, Anders, you want to say something?
Yeah, it was just to highlight the perspectives of from our practice side as well. We see a lot of these we call them green natives, like digital natives. We see a generation coming now who has this agenda as a second skin. And I think that the best way we can support them is by listening to them and try to understand the tool sets that they require to move this forward. Because I think that there's a different perspective, and Serge also mentioned this, is that what we do now, if we're successful, will also create an interesting model for export. Because right now we are looking to emerging markets that are coming along very well, that have been looking at our way of living for the past 75 years and want that as well. So I think if we are actually going to be responsible for not just our own well-being and the sustainability of our own urban landscapes, we also have to understand what message we're sending to the rest of the world who are trying to model their future societies on what we have done. So setting up a model based on future thinking and on green natives, the emerging generation, and focusing on the fact that the world are looking. And we created this mess, so we should also come up with some scalable solutions.
Serge, is the rest of the world learning from our mistakes and also from our newfound talent to get us out of this mess?
Yeah, to answer also your previous question, I would put money on modularity in construction because this is really key. We once again, the 20th century has moved out millennia of modularity in construction. If you look at cultures like Japan, everything was in wood and you can dismantle it. There was no nails. It was just carpentry, very clever carpentry, and you can move your house 100 meters away in the same plot of land or even far away. Even the houses in Europe with the wood frame and then the fillings made the houses you could move them. This has been lasting for millennia, actually. And even when the Industrial Revolution came, this was not discarded so quickly. When I was thinking about the train stations, wonderful train stations in iron and steel of the 19th century, even the Tour Eiffel, you can really dismantle the Tour Eiffel entirely and then rebuild it. It's a mechano work. And then with the concrete and the buildings where this modularity disappeared. And probably the same way we have created zero energy buildings and low energy building first, and we spent a decade moving to zero energy building, and it was costly and it was experimental and it was in universities and it was commissioned by zero energy centers, national zero energy centers, and now it has become the norm. So the same way we could have circular, modular, because this is also you cannot take even the European Parliament. I'm sorry about that, but you cannot take the European Parliament and dismantle it. You will end up with a pile of concrete garbage, and having also some iconic buildings, some important buildings. Why not the EU is not commissioning a big visible building for itself, and not an unnecessary building, but the next building of the EU made entirely modular to be able to become circular. We must put money in this type of demo buildings, and this the governments and the EU and the international organizations could do it, because even themselves they don't commission buildings to be modular and circular. So that could pave the way to transformative change.
Right. I was very interested in that we were talking earlier, a little bit about how much, directives are coming out from the European Union, initiatives, blah, 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 blah. Per mentioning the Innovation Directorate General and this sort of thing. But are there some gaps here? I mean, I mean, can people actually get their hands on high quality materials that have, or is it still being treated as waste? Do we bank materials in a quality way that we can then reuse them in the future, even 20 years down the road or 30 years down the road? Is public procurement behind what we want to achieve with a circular construction industry? And so on and so forth. End of waste life directives, do they need to be retweaked or refocused? Anybody got any thoughts on this? Anders, that was quite quick. Yes, you're first.
Yeah, I was lucky to be a part of a conference this Thursday by the Scandinavian region, where the municipalities of Stockholm, Copenhagen, Malmö, and were invited to have a discussion about what is the municipality's role as, in this agenda and moving this agenda forward. And I think it became very clear very fast that the way they structure their procurement, the way they structure their tenders as well, and the requirements they have up front for the built environment, it's a huge driver for potential change. And by actually looking at the urban development from that point of view is actually a key driver for not just the change in the actual built environment, but also the understanding of what is needed and what is required, not for the buildings that are going to happen right now, but also for the flexibility needed for the future. So a key actor in this value chain, as Per also said, is definitely the municipalities.
Yeah, Peter?
Just briefly, that modular buildings and modular construction, absolutely. Again, Serge has a very good point there. We need to jumpstart that very much. As an example, here in Estonia, in tiny Estonia, the Fresh Coalition Agreement has underlined it too, that modular buildings should come about, that the government, be it the national or the local governments, should start commissioning such things. For example, there's something in the works already, both here in Estonia and over in Ukraine, where every country has a part of Ukraine that they're helping to rebuild. A new modular kindergarten was just constructed in a part of Ukraine, and they're doing it. There's a pilot program here too. So in the future, should everything go as planned, new kindergartens, or a lion's share of them, will be built from wood, secondary wood if possible, secondary materials, and in a modular fashion, so that you can increase or decrease their size, and etc.
Christina?
Yeah, thank you. At the moment, we are starting the new regulation in Norway that you have to design for disassembly. So you have to think modular. It's actually not allowed not to. Again, we lack standards. How do we measure this? We have to get them going so that it's actually possible to control and measure.
Finally, just back on the innovation thing, because it seemed to me that I think Anders was talking about digitalization and digital natives or green digital natives. There seems to be a whole kind of revolution happening in terms of, drone technology, artificial intelligence, in terms of, designing structures that maybe minimize the amount of materials they use in the first place, and so on and so forth. Are we on the cusp of a major technological revolution in the way we design cities and the way we manage buildings and what we do with the resource flows that either happen in terms of energy or in terms of waste that actually emerges from any demolition? Peter?
I think we are. We're either on the brink of the collapse of our societies, or uncovering something completely new in everything, right? So perhaps we are. But I think that there's more to our thinking. There lies more in our thinking and the way we do things. Why do we commission new buildings, cities, streets? Do we really need that? Do we need that size, etc.? So a British architect, Cedric Price, once asked in 1966 that he said, technology is the answer, but what was the question? So I think there's so much we can do already with existing technologies, and we need to really critically think and reassess why do we build or renovate or do one thing or the other. And the previous question about legislation and such, in this roadmap of ours in Estonia, it's very similar to a construction sector roadmap that Finland has, Sweden has, Norway has, and Denmark has, and even the Netherlands, for example. I'm sure there are other countries too. But those roadmaps, climate neutral construction sector roadmaps, we analyzed through, and they all resonate the same ideas, and including recommendations for legislation that Christina just mentioned too. That specific thing we have in our roadmap too, that we need to have legislation that when we commission new buildings, the public sector does that with procurement, it needs to have a selective demolition plan in that already. So that
Serge, I'm going to give you the final word on this before I turn to Per Lars.
Briefly. Your question on artificial intelligence and technology, for me, brings us back to the difference between complexity and complication. The complex systems actually generate endless diversity from simple rules. Just like this tatami mat in Japan was the overarching modular system, which then generated thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of different houses from the same components, from the same modular system. And this basically is the way nature proceeds. Nature proceeds by generating trees which are all different from very simple growth rules. And in a sense, there is a high risk with artificial intelligence and technology that we don't use them for generating diverse and a high amount of diversity from simple rules, but we use the technology for making highly complicated things, because the human mind wouldn't be able to master these complicated things because they're too complicated, and the artificial intelligence will be able to master them. So that's a huge risk, and I think keeping it simple, the modularity ID, the recycling ID, keeping things simple and touching the heart, the health. Sorry, touching the health lightly. This was one of my favorite Australian architects wrote a book, and his buildings was touching the health lightly and keeping things simple are probably a better way of approaching this circularity issue in construction, rather than using computers to create very, very complicated things.
Good. Serge, on that very popular topic of artificial intelligence, we're going to close this show here, but I'm going to hand over to my co-moderator, Per Larsens. Per, give us a bit of a sum up of what you heard and next steps. And what has this whole story got to do with COP28? Sorry, I went to the next UN climate conference in Dubai because we're all on a journey to someplace, and I think that's one of the next journeys as well at the end of the year.
We can start with the COP28 part. We have talked about the huge CO2 savings that we can achieve by focusing on circularity and construction sector. So I think that is a clear message that the scope 3 emissions need to be in focus. We have until now focusing on scope 1 and scope 2, transport and energy, but now we really need to focus on material. And I think that IPCC was very clear on that one in the report that was published on 4th of April 2022, that if you're not focusing on circular material flows, the industry will not be able to support the need of fulfilling the Paris Agreement. So I think it's spot on. I also would like to highlight, and that was also mentioned by several of you, the importance of material banking. In the report that the International Chamber of Commerce published at the World Circular Economy Forum in the beginning of June this year. It was the first report from our global working group on circular economy. We highlighted just material banking as a key component, because you need to do large scale when you're going to remodel, and you need to have the material available when you're going to do the remodeling. It's not easy to directly move material to the next building. The second part is that we need to have quality come before origin. Today, it's origin that determines if you can trade goods or not. And if you're going to cross borders with reused building material, it's almost impossible. And the third thing from the report, which is very important, is that we need to support the ability to trade volumes of resources for research purposes. Today, it's almost impossible to research new innovations where you can construct new building materials if we need to cross the border. So please go into International Chamber of Commerce global website, and you will be able to download the report. But really interesting to hear the perspective from France or UN, and we talk about Norway, mentioned by Estonia as a good example. I totally agree. But to be honest, I think that the country where we have seen is the forerunner when it comes to remodeling is Denmark. So especially thanks to you, Anders. I think your company is one of the leaders of driving the change. And we will love to support you going forward. And thank you, Nick, for excellent hosting.
Thank you very much, everybody. This is not the end of the story. It's not even the beginning of the end of the story. This is going to go on for a lot longer than this show here. But I think there were some important perspectives. I really enjoyed it, and thank you all of you for being with us. And bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.